Let's chat to Norman Baker, former Transport Minister. Norman, good afternoon to you.
Hello, Ian. Good to see you.
And good to see you again too. Did you ever have a tally when you were Transport Minister as how often this phrase war on motorists cropped up?
It cropped up a lot. It was a very tired, cliched phrase, to be honest with you.
I'm sure.
It's rolled out every couple of months by the Conservatives in particular. And it doesn't actually stack up, I have to say. Look, I'm in favour of making sure that motorists aren't exploited. And when I was a minister, for example, I banned private sector wheel clamping, which was an absolute disgrace at the time by cowboys. And I also took steps to try and deal with private parking companies who were not behaving properly towards motorists. So there are matters to be dealt with. But, you know, the reality, if you look at the cost of motoring compared to the cost of public transport, the cost of motoring over 30 years, all governments, Tory, Labour, coalition, has risen far less than the cost going by bus or by train. You know, if there's a war on at the moment, it's a war on public transport users.
Do you think so? I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is ridiculous cost for rail in this country. We've never seemed to be able to do that thing they do in everywhere from Russia to France of having affordable rail fares. You know, I went to Darlington the other day, a couple of £100, I think the ticket was, just to get them. I mean, extraordinary prices. That's more expensive than driving a car. You're right.
Yeah, they've gone up above inflation, you know, more years than not. And, you know, it drives people off the railways and onto the roads. And by the way, if it drives them onto the roads, it worsens congestion. But, you know, fuel duty, for example, has been frozen. In fact, it's been cut since 2011. There's a temporary cut, so-called, in place at the moment. Rail fares have gone up every year. So, you know, comparatively speaking, those who use buses and trains, bus fares have gone up £2 to £3 this year. You know, they've been a lot worse off. In
terms of things like electric cars, which now there's now an annual levy on that.
Yeah.
Of course, at one point, one of the attractions of an electric car, Norman, was that there was no road tax on it, and that was fabulous because they weren't doing what, you know, ordinary petrol and diesel cars were doing. That's long gone, and it's now, you know, the direction of travel will be that will increase annually, just like road tax increase annually, and that money doesn't go directly to repairing roads, right?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. First of all, I should say I paid no road tax on my car because I've got a 1971 Triumph Aero convertible,
nice,
which I've been out in today in the lovely sunshine. But I mean, the reality is that the amount of money taken from the motorist in terms of tax has actually been decreasing relative to inflation, certainly, because people have been moving from petrol and diesel cars onto electric cars. And of course, there hasn't been a charge on electric cars until very recently. And the Treasury's been losing lots of money. In fact, the so-called black hole that the Labour government keeps going on about, if fuel duty had risen by inflation every year since 2011, that black hole wouldn't exist. That's how much money the Treasury has lost. And it's looking at the situation where if all cars are electric in 10 years' time or 15 years' time, then what will happen is there's no money coming in unless they actually charge the electric vehicle for the same road tax as the petrol and diesel vehicles pay now. Now, I know it's uncomfortable because part of the attraction, as you say, Ian, is the electric vehicle has been free of road tax. But, you know, realistically, the Treasury cannot lose £30 billion a year, which is what they're taking at the moment from fuel duty and VAT.
Is there there's another point here, though, isn't there, that it's harder for motorists in some respects, whether the expense issue stacks up, as you were just alluding to, Norman, but that things like low traffic neighbourhoods, things like it's not just London where we often focus on the ULEZ zone in London, but other cities have similar initiatives. We know that, you know, Andy Burnham is in Manchester is toying with all sorts of ideas in that area. It's the fact that, you know, wherever you turn, it feels, as a motorist, there's something. There's a camera that's either going to nab you for doing 2 miles an hour over the limit, it's going to nick you for the audacity of driving into your capital city, and then when you do so, if your car doesn't hit some man-made figure that Sadiq Khan's boys came up with, then it's going to charge you another £12.50, and then when you go to park your car, because you've got a slightly older vehicle, it's going to charge you more for the parking in certain boroughs as well. It could cost you £100 before you've even bought yourself a burger in Oxford Street.
Well, there are a lot of extra charges, and the one thing you mentioned earlier on, which I totally agree with, is the state of our roads. Not the main highways, which are run by the government, by the Highways Agency, Highways England now, or National Highways, I think it's called, keeps changing its name. But the local roads are an absolute disgrace in this country. You go to France, and the roads are perfect. They're flat as a pancake. Over here, you have to watch where you're driving because there are so many potholes around. So there's a real case to get more money into local authorities to get the roads sorted out. That's perfectly true. Now, if you have a good public transport option, as we do in some places, and it's well designed and it's fair, then that can be a good thing. It can work well with motorists, because actually what you do is you provide a good alternative. People, if they want to switch, can switch. If they don't want to switch, they don't have to switch, and they can still drive around as they were before. That's a kind of perfect solution. And that sometimes works. I mean, it works in Brighton, actually, to a large degree, because there's fantastic public transport in Brighton. And it does mean that the number of cars on the road has diminished because they're on buses and trains. And that makes it easier for those who are still in their cars. That works well. But there are areas across the country where the incentives and initiatives have been taken, which actually are not well designed and cause problems. And obviously they need to be sorted out.
Indeed. Norman, always great to get your take on these things. Thank you. He speaks from an experienced position as a former Transport Minister, Norman Baker. He says, set against the rate of inflation, it's actually cheaper to drive than it used to be. Well, I guess that depends which part of the dial you look at when you're trying to draw a conclusion on this one. We know that things like car insurance has gone up exponentially. I mean, it's ludicrous. Road tax is, it seems to me, the Treasury now use road tax almost in the same way as they, when there's a budget and they'll put, you know that the tax on cigarettes is going to go up. You kind of know the tax on road tax is going to go up as well. Let's get a word on that point. David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics at Birmingham Business School. David, good afternoon to you, sir.
Hello there.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, there is a little bit of that. There's mischief, isn't there, around the motorists, because they do know that, apart from those that don't bother with insurance and road tax, and I'm sure they're small in number, but they are out there, but if it goes up by 10 quid or 20 quid or even 50 quid a year, governments know you're going to pay it because you have to pay it because you need a car.
Well, that's absolutely right. And so, economists talk about these things where you've got inelastic demand. You're still going to consume the product even if the price goes up enough.
Yeah.
The governments tend to whack those things with a lot of tax because that's a great way of raising tax revenue. I thought Norman was very interesting. That was a terrific interview. And he's right in the sense the government has had to really freeze fuel duty for a long time because of the backlash against it. But there are lots of other costs that have gone up. It's very interesting when I see my students, and we talk about a lot of these things. And when I was at university a long time ago, many of us would have had cars. I asked the group of students today, hardly any do. And it's because of things like car insurance going up so much. But also there's alternatives for them. They can get into an Uber relatively cheaply. That didn't exist when I was a student. They can get on an electric scooter that they can hire. So, they can do other things. One of the things about car insurance is that the Competition and Markets Authority was meant to have stopped this tendency in the industry for home insurance as well, whereby you're with an insurer and they almost penalise you. They give you a big renewal premium hike, and then you look around, you can get it a lot cheaper somewhere else, and you haggle it down. I've just been through that with my home insurance, and I thought that the CMA was meant to have stopped that. But we're still in the situation where if you get a kind of loyalty penalty by staying with the insurance. So my advice is always look around. Yeah. It requires a bit of effort, but shop around and use the market.
Well, that's why God invented Martin Lewis, of course, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
You can have a little look around. But I mean, I discovered, interestingly, on that very point, David, recently, that because I've done that for a number of years, and you'd be with, and I'd never thought this would happen. I think I've changed insurance companies almost every year for about 6 years now. That would never have been the case. You'd have just stuck with, who you were with, the AA or Halifax or whoever it happened to be. But what I did notice on the last time my insurance was being renewed was that when I went to the price comparison sites, the differentials had kind of not completely disappeared, but they'd narrowed quite a bit. I couldn't quite find that. We've all seen it when your insurance company is asking for £1,000 a year. You discover one down here that's £400 a year. You think, how could there be such a difference? So you clearly go for that one. That seems to be less and less. And I don't know whether there's something in the world of business where companies are simply working on the very crude basis that as consumers, we expect everything to go up at the moment. So they're joining in with the party and going, well, we might as well put it up because it won't be any surprise.
Yeah, it could be. I think it is more heavily regulated. So this kind of ability of firms to whack up the premium and capture you is being limited. But I mean, I've just been through a situation where my insurer increased my premium by I think 130, and I had to ring up and say, hang on a minute, this is taking the mickey.
Yep.
Can you get it down in line with the competition? And they brought it down by about 50 quid. So it's always worth ringing and threatening to go. I think on some of the other points that Norman raised, he was extremely thoughtful. It was great hearing from a former minister. Of course, one of the things that is happening is as we're going electric cars are more expensive. The upfront price of them are more expensive. So that's another feeling that actually things are getting more expensive. It still makes sense if it's going through a company because you get a big tax break, or if you can charge at home. But if you can't charge at home, it becomes very expensive, and there isn't a cost saving for you. So my point all along is if we want people to save the planet and go electric, we've got to start giving them some better incentives.
100%. Big issues around that, and we could talk on that point alone. Listen, David, we hit the clock, but thank you as ever. David Bailey, Professor of Business Economics at Birmingham Business School. Thank you to him and to Norman Baker.